Hi, welcome to Beyond the Map, a podcast about travel, self-discovery, and the beauty found between destinations. I'm Francesca Page, and each week we'll explore the meaningful moments, mindful rituals, and hidden details that make every journey a little more human. Today on Beyond the Map, we're talking about where we're going, how we're traveling, and what's shaping our choices as we head into the fall. My guest is Christie Hudson, the resident travel expert and head of global PR for Hotels.com. Christie has a unique ability to take travel data and turn it into insights and advice that actually helps us travel smarter. She's regularly featured in outlets including the New York Times, Travel and Leisure, Today, and on travel podcasts like this. And today we're looking at the biggest fall travel trends, the destinations having a moment, and what travelers really need to know before booking their next getaway. Hi, Christie. Thank you for coming on Beyond the Map. It's a pleasure to have you here today. I've given a little bit of a brief intro, if you will, into who you are and what you do, but if you'd like to expand, that would be great.
Yes, thanks for having me. Excited to come talk fall travel with you. I'm Christie. I have been with Expedia as a travel expert for almost a decade. So I get to talk about travel all day. I get to go on and share insights and data with news outlets. But my passion is really just helping people find deals, find ways to go places, and maybe find unexpected places to visit. So excited to share some insights with y'all.
Well, as a fellow travel expert, we both were discussing a little earlier the fact that we're coming now into the fall. So let's start talking about the big picture here. As we do head into the fall, what are you seeing in the data that tells you the way we're traveling is changing?
Yeah, well, fall used to be this time when travel demand would really fall off a cliff after summer, right? The kids all go back to school. Everyone's done with their big European trips. And fall used to be this sweet spot that the travel industry called the shoulder season, when the weather's still really nice, but prices would go down and the crowds would kind of dwindle. And it used to be a little bit of a well-kept secret for people who had the flexibility to travel during that time. That's definitely changing. So we're seeing summer travel demand spill more and more into fall. And it's changing how busy places are. We have some data from Vrbo, which is a vacation rental company, that says it's actually almost 20% busier this fall than it was last fall. And that's increases on increases. This is a trend that we've been seeing for several years that just isn't slowing down. And what's happening is that demand is impacting prices as well. So it's getting a little bit harder to find those sweet spot fall deals. Not impossible, but for example, Expedia data shows that in the top 10 US destinations, flight and lodging prices are actually higher. Like lodging prices are 20% higher in the fall than they were during the summer if you're going to one of those places. So things are really changing when it comes to fall travel.
Yeah, and we touched upon this too. I mean, it sort of depends when your kids go back to school, right? So if, I said I've got one child that's going back 2 weeks earlier than the other one, if you're in a certain state, right, that would also have an impact on whether you have that kind of sweet spot, especially that first week of September, where the majority of kids have gone back to school. And those in states like I'm in, like New York State, they're still out. And that's when I do feel like there's a kind of sweet spot. You mentioned the shoulder season, which is a term that I use very frequently. I have made fun of by my partner for him saying basically it doesn't exist, but I do believe it does exist.
It does.
Yes. I mean, I think that shoulder season is really, and there's another shoulder season, I believe, in the springtime, right?
Yes.
After the fall. When is that period?
Yeah. So it definitely depends on what type of destination, but you're totally right. For fall, early September, there's still savings. You can still find some really good deals in early September. Prices escalate in October, actually. October is kind of the priciest month. And then early November is another good time for savings right before
Thanksgiving or after.
And holiday travel kind of ramps up. It's a little bit of like a mini moment again. In the winter/spring, it depends, right? If you're going to a ski destination, you're not going to find deals in late February or March, right? And then April during certain weeks, you got to watch out for those spring break destinations. If you want to go to Hawaii or Mexico or the Caribbean, those prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
I think that the trick here is you got to zig when other people are zagging. For example, my husband and I went to Italy in mid-May last year. And we must have spent half the price on our 5-star Sicily hotel than you do 3 weeks later. So you have to find these pockets and you have to find the right destination at the right time. But it does exist. There are savings you can have, and finding those low moments is a real good hack.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned Italy. We went to Italy as a family at the end of July, and we booked that months and months before. Like, I think we booked it in February. And what we noticed when we got there, actually, when we got home, when I was posting content from the trip and everything, was the sheer amount of people that were there during the time we were there. And I'm talking everyone from like celebrities like Jennifer Lopez to, people I knew. And I was like, oh my gosh, Italy's having a moment. Why didn't we, we spent a lot of money, but not half as much as we would have had we booked later. But it was definitely having a moment. So when you talk about zigzagging, I think we booked early so we were safe. But when you see these destinations that are trending, if you will, that's kind of like where you kind of have to go, well, where is not trending necessarily, because that's where I'm going to find a better deal. But yeah, I noticed that Italy really had a moment this summer. It just seemed to be everyone was there. It was the strangest thing.
That's how I feel when I'm not in Italy in the summer. I just get so much FOMO. I'm like, everyone's having an Italy summer.
I know.
And I'm just at work writing emails. So tragic. It hurts.
You know what I've noticed, and I don't know, I don't have the statistics and the data that you do, but I have noticed that over the past couple of years, we've gone through trends, right? And I talk about travel trends a lot on television and stuff, but there was like the big road trip year and people were like, you know what, flights are so expensive, I'm going to just stay close to home. But then this year, for some reason, again, I felt like I noticed an uptick in European travel, to my point. Like people were going back on planes over to Europe. I don't remember that as much the previous few years. I think people were sticking closer to home. I don't know whether that has to do with flight prices to Europe or people have just got stir crazy and they want to go there. I don't know what, but I did notice a lot more people traveling internationally this summer.
Yeah. I think that your hunch is correct, although Europe has been doing really well the last couple years. I think it actually maybe had a little bit less demand this summer than it did the previous summer to some places. There are, I think in general, just kind of going back to what's changing and maybe driving that fall increase. Yeah. I think overcrowding and really hot weather in some of the touristy places people want to go during the summer is having an impact on just people's decision making, not canceling trips, but maybe looking for different times to go to these places. You hear a lot about heat waves. I don't know how hot it was when you went to Italy, but I know a lot of people who exactly that you can't get an ice cube in your water, like these luxuries we're used to in the US. So, people are, I think the fall to travel to a place like Italy or Paris and be able to walk and roam and walk around without sitting in 100 degrees at a cafe on the sidewalk is really appealing. I think it's one factor. Summer prices have increased a lot over the last few years, especially airfare prices. So that is another reason why people are seeking out lower periods to go. I'm seeing a growing trend with other elementary school parents where they're taking their kids out of school during the fall, just a week or two here and there, and not really feeling as restricted. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'm sure teachers would have something to say, but we've done it for sure. I know other parents have done it too.
So I went to private school in the UK. My parents did it all the time. And my mum would use the excuse that we used to go to Florida a lot from the UK where I have other family. And we'd go off season, like hurricane season. Now, the beauty of it was we didn't spend a lot. The other beauty of it was that should there be any threat of a hurricane, that was the excuse of us not having to go back to school and we could stay longer in Florida. But I do find it interesting because my mom had no problem doing that. And there was no legal, a month would be a big deal, but there
Yeah.
wasn't as much of a pull around that. I don't know, and that's an intriguing point. In the US, with the public school system, if you will, whether is that allowed? Can you take your kids out? I mean, I don't know whether that's an
Yeah.
option, but yeah,
It feels
I don't know.
like a gray area. Like you said, a month would probably be pretty frowned upon. I think a week here and there is probably, you can probably get away with it as long as your kids aren't, especially when they're in elementary school, they're not missing
Yeah,
any finals or big exams or anything like this. They're
yeah,
not going to fall behind. I think if you're gone too much, they do start to send home notes that, kids need to be at school.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, we've all received one. But I think there is a little bit of a gray area there. And if you don't abuse it, then it's not. There's something to be said, I think, about kids having experiences, or even if it's the only time you can get them together with family that lives elsewhere in an affordable way. Seeing their our in-laws live outside of the state, seeing their grandparents is important to them. So, and their cousins. So I don't know. Obviously, I'm a
Well,
little bit biased being in this
listen,
industry, but
yeah, I was going to say, being a travel expert, like for me, the travel is the educational part. I traveled as much as I could with my daughter before she was in school, but she also was born during the beginning of COVID. So while I wanted to take her everywhere, I was in lockdown essentially and couldn't really travel as much as I would have before she entered into the public school system. But that being said, let's touch upon what destinations, going back to the full travel aspect, are you seeing that are having a moment? And are there sort of any unexpected places based on the data that you've got?
Yeah. So some of the places that we're seeing an increase in searches. So the top 10 don't change too much. People tend to go to the big cities. They tend to go to, the Miamis and New Yorks and the Mexicos and the Caribbeans and the Hawaiis. Okay. But we do see a couple trending destinations. Myrtle Beach is big for this fall. People are going to Fort Walton. Honolulu is affordable and is one of the more affordable Hawaiian islands to visit this fall. San Diego. So you could still go to beaches in the fall, which is great. And then if you're kind of over the beaches in the summer, now is a great time to go to mountain destinations before the weather gets bad or before ski season picks up. So a couple places like Bozeman and Billings, Aspen are really good
Yeah.
options for the shoulder season, really beautiful. And these are year-round destinations. A lot of people think of them just for kind of ski or summertime, but they really are year-round. They have different offerings, hikes, outdoorsy stuff, shopping. Like they're just great places to go in the fall as well. And then two international affordable places that popped up that were kind of unexpected to me was Calgary in Canada.
I used
So
to live there.
did you? Okay, well then you can speak to Calgary being a lovely fall
Oh, it's amazing.
destination. Yeah, Larch season, right?
Yeah, and I learned to be a snowboard instructor there, but and to your point, I mean, these destinations are so beautiful this time, well, not this time, well, as we head into fall, all the way through October. I mean, they're gorgeous destinations to visit. When
Yes.
you think of them as just ski areas, they're not. I mean, I'm dying to go to Montana this fall if I have the time.
Yes.
But I'm going to North Carolina, by example, at the end of September, and it's still warm, but it's cooler at night. It's like the perfect temperature.
Yes. You get
I'm
that
going to Charlotte.
Yeah.
It's
Crisp mornings. I love that.
It's great. And you've got I'm going to Charlotte. I went 2 years ago where my girlfriend lives, and there's so much to do. The temperature's perfect. You're kind of in that sweet spot, if you will, with prices. But yeah, I think those are great recommendations. Mountain towns, especially in the fall, are super.
Yeah, there was one other one that popped up that was interesting to me is Manchester in the UK, which is, a 2-hour train ride from London, which is one of my favorite cities ever. But you could go to Manchester, fix your World Cup hangover, catch a soccer match or a football match. If you're over there, don't call it soccer. There's a big literature festival, and you won't pay London prices. So, there's also ways to kind of maybe go to some of these bigger destinations that are going to be pricier, maybe spend a night or two, and then take some trips outside of those big destinations. And that's where you can find some savings and extend your trip.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of prices, the million-dollar question, how would you suggest that travelers get the most for their money coming up this fall? Like, what should people know before they book? How should they go about that in the best way to save money?
Yep. Well, hope isn't lost. I know we've talked a lot about how fall travel's changing, but hope isn't lost. We talked a little earlier about there are peak times and there are lower times. So hotels.com data says that early September is the best time to travel during the fall, or early November. You can save 10% or more on your lodging prices compared to summer. So still a true shoulder season deal. Flights are harder. They're very dynamic. If business travel happens a lot in the fall, right, it peaks with conferences and different things like that. So if you're going to a bigger city that has a lot of business travel, you may see flight prices really increase. But there are a couple tricks. Don't travel during those windows when business travelers are traveling. Don't leave on a Monday morning and come back on a Thursday, for example. Leave on a Sunday instead. Leave midweek and stay until midweek. We do a lot of Monday to Monday or Tuesday to Tuesday travel in my house to save money on airfare. And it really does make a difference. You can also, if you're kind of just still in the inspiration phase, where should I go? There's a tool on the Expedia app called Flight Deals. And from your home airport, it'll show you any trending deal that's cheaper than normal, 30 to 40% cheaper than normal. Kind of is a nice way to just start with the map and see what are my options here if I'm looking for a bit of savings to begin that process of deciding where to go.
Well, that's good to know, because I think the biggest question everyone has whenever we're using these tools is how to use them, where, because it is kind of like you have to figure out how to use them in the best way possible. And I'm always being asked, what are the tips and tricks because obviously prices are always the biggest question, is how do I get the biggest bang for my buck? Let's talk about common booking mistakes. What's one mistake you see travelers making over and over again when they are booking hotels or planning a trip like this?
Well, I hope I don't offend anyone, but it is not one mistake. I see a lot of mistakes, to be honest with you. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is not reading the reviews on a hotel.
Right.
People look at things like star rating, and they look at the price, and they look at the photos. They look at what amenities are listed, but they don't read the recent reviews. And so you don't know that the second pool, the kids' pool, is closed because of construction. You don't know that they have a live DJ every night, Thursday through Sunday night, that goes until 2 a.m. and you can't escape it. You don't actually know about what the experience at the hotel is going to be like unless you read the recent reviews. So that's a huge one. I spend, and there's all these like AI summaries, which is nice. You don't have to spend 40 minutes clicking through.
Right.
Read the reviews. One thing I do, I forget to check whether there's air conditioning, to our earlier point. And then my husband, we have to switch hotels, once we get there. So don't forget to look for things that are important to you.
Well, I was going to say, not to interrupt you, but I was just thinking back. We booked, my partner and I booked a hotel 3 years ago in the Catskills. Beautiful place. We didn't realize, and we booked one of the nicest rooms overlooking the grounds, if you will. And we didn't know that there would be a wedding that weekend.
Yeah.
And so what we thought would be a quiet, peaceful, romantic weekend away ended up, granted it was fun because we crashed the wedding anyway, but it was, should you have been there with like a small baby or whatever, they had music blaring until 3 a.m. right underneath our window. I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
I would have no way
how
of
would
knowing.
you? That's a tough one to predict, those, when things like that happen. We stayed in a beautiful hotel in Taormina, Sicily last year. And the first night, there's a piano player in the bar, and it went on forever. And if you're the kind of person who wants to be down at the bar until 2 a.m., then you don't mind. I am lame. I'm not that person. I want to go to bed. But it also doesn't hurt to be nice and just talk to the front desk and be like, this isn't for me. They moved us to a nicer, quieter room across the hotel.
Yeah.
There are solves sometimes. But another mistake I see is, and this seems very basic, but I can't believe how often I've talked to people where this has happened, is not checking the weather, the average weather.
Yeah.
When people pick a place to go. Seeing a really great deal on a place during September, October, and then not realizing it's because it's monsoon season there.
Yeah.
or hurricane season. And so you got to check and just make sure that you might be getting some really great savings, but why? Why is it so cheap? Double check. And then not checking where the hotel is located and seeing how far or how hard it's going to be to get to the things you want to see and do. A 25-minute walk, if you're a New Yorker, doesn't seem like a lot because in New York, you walk everywhere and everything's walkable. If you're in Houston, that's going to be across 3 freeways. So you got to just check and see where the location is, how long it's going to take you, and make sure you're making the right trade-offs.
Well, it's interesting you say that because my recent trip to Italy, and I always do this sort of careful balance. I let my partner book this one. I'm neurotic when I book things just based on my profession alone. And he, which I think a lot of travelers do, and I respect this too, left some room for flexibility, or rather, we'll just find a restaurant, or we'll just find, and I love that kind of wanderlust idea of, you come across things, and I think there's something to be said about that. I think with children, that's a tough one to do because if they're hungry and it's, a certain time in the day and you don't have anywhere you've planned to go and you're like, we'll just come across it when we come across it, you run a bit of a struggle. And so, things like we didn't, and I was going to say one of the things I've noticed that people forget about, to your point, is transportation. Knowing, especially, I traveled internationally this summer, when you are traveling internationally, how you get from A to B with the language barrier, with, GPS, with maybe not having Wi-Fi to be able to look at GPS, knowing like how long it takes to get from A to B. It was a mistake. I wouldn't say mistake. We figured it out. We made on our past trip where we hadn't really predicted how long it would take to walk from A to B, not excluding crowds and all of that. With kids, to the point where everyone ended up with blisters because we walked way too much and didn't predict that, but also didn't know until we got there and had to research it, the cab companies and how to utilize them and which ones were not going to, take too much money from us. And I think all those preparations, as neurotic as they sound, just having them for peace of mind. So you're not spending your trip kind of doing the research while you're on site, if that makes sense.
I totally agree. I like to know a little bit of the lay of the land so that I can feel confident exploring. With kids, it throws a whole other, like you said, they can't just walk all day. So you have to be a little bit more pre-planned. One thing I love to do is, especially if I'm traveling by myself, I love to use Google Maps has a cool feature where you just drop a bunch of pins and you can save it to a trip board. So I have a whole London trip board with all of the restaurants that I've tagged. I also love to vintage shop, and I plan some of my exploration around where there's good vintage shopping or vintage markets, which is a fun way to see different parts of the city that maybe are outside of the tourist spots. I must have 35 bookmarked vintage shops in London. I only hit like 10 of them, but I came across some cool stuff doing that. And then become an expert at the travel in that, how you get around in that area, whether it's figuring out how the bus system works. It seems daunting, but it's not. It's going to take you an hour to figure out max. Maybe you'll get on a bus going the wrong way. Someone local will help you and be friendly.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like the London Tube, which obviously you can tell I'm from London, but the London Tube is so much simpler than the New York subway. Having moved from London directly to New York, I got onto the subway in New York and I was like, I got lost within 5 minutes. The tube system there is so simple.
It's so simple. It's so great.
And clean.
But yeah, you can do it. It just takes a little bit of research and be ready for a little bit of a learning curve. But there's so many tools, whether it's Google Maps can show you how to get somewhere with a plane, train, and automobile, involved. Like you can get anywhere. There's so many tools. Back when I first started traveling, when I was in my, early 20s, I don't even think I had cell service in some of these cities I went to. That made it a little bit trickier when there was a different language on the metro, and I had never taken an underground transportation in my life. I went the wrong way away from Paris for a while. It's easier now. There's tons of tools.
Well, and to that end, it's a mistake that I have made, and I actually did make on this past trip. I didn't have international calling, and I couldn't get internet unless I was in somewhere with Wi-Fi, which made it very scary if I got lost. And I think preparing yourself on that kind of tick list, like, again, I think there's something to be said about over preparing, but if you have basic things down, like you're saying, the pins, the sites to look at, you've done a good amount of research that you've got options and choices, but you also have like safety under control. Your phone works. I mean, again, that's make sure you've got international calling, Wi-Fi, whatever, and knowing sort of the lay of the land, if you will, even if you haven't been there, just so you're best prepared and you're not sitting there stressing out on a trip where that's the whole point, is to not stress out.
Yeah. And knowing, some basic things too, like, do I need local currency in my pocket
Yes.
when I arrive to pay the taxi? Don't assume everywhere can tap your credit card. It is not that way in some destinations. Also, I would recommend knowing how much it costs to get from the airport to the city center on average, so that you don't get ripped off. Because sometimes if you look like a big old tourist, they're going to tell you something and you're not going to know whether that's fair or not. And they might not have a meter that's running. They may not have Uber. So like you said, safety, being prepared, doing a little bit of research so you know how to move in that place is going to help you enjoy your trip so much more.
Yeah, and funny you say that. One of my first experiences as an adult, young adult, in Rome, I got off the plane, I got in a taxi, and I was going to an Italian friend's house, and my Italian was terrible at the time. And the taxi driver said, "Oh, I know where it is. I'll take you." And he basically took me in circles for half an hour. And I called my Italian friend and he's like, put him on the phone. And he basically ripped me off, me looking like I didn't speak good enough Italian and I'd come from London. And when we went back this past summer, my partner, who looks very Dutch and German and towers above most of the Italian population, was trying to find a taxi. And I warned him ahead of time. I said, please, for the love of God, be careful of the prices. And sure enough, he went up to the guy, gave him a price, and I said, that's too much. He said, tell him it's too much or we'll walk. Gave him another price. Anyway, negotiated the price down. And I said, well, you've got to do that. And a lot of people will just take it at point blank and be like, yeah, that's fine. And if you do the research before and you look at what's the average price, to your point, from A to B, whether it's as simple as from the basic trips, right? From the airport to the hotel or destination or whatever you're going to, then you know what the baseline is. Because a lot of people don't know the currency exchange rate. They don't, and they'll just be like, I'm going to take out this much. And that's another thing as well. Being careful where you exchange your money, I think, is also important. I think a lot of people get ripped off in that regard as well. And even the language barriers. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, and to be clear, I believe, and tell me if this is what you know to be true as well, the currency exchange at the airport is one of the worst places you can actually do your currency exchange. Going to your bank or even your bank's ATM and doing a currency exchange if they offer that through the ATM. But going to your bank is always going to get you a better rate. Sometimes doing it there from an ATM is the best way. But if you need some money in your wallet before you kind of land, you can do a little bit of both. I would not recommend, and I never, ever get out thousands of dollars in local currency before I get on the plane. You don't need that much because most places are going to take credit card, or you can go to an ATM there. You don't also want to set yourself up to be robbed because that happens. So get enough to get you into the city from the airport and, have a little bit of flexibility, but you don't need to get all of your money for the whole trip out before you get there.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. You spend a lot of time looking at the numbers behind how we travel, right? What do you think those numbers tell us about what people are craving in their lives right now, especially as we head into this fall season, as we talked about, in your opinion?
The thing I find most surprising and encouraging is that even in times when the economy is tough, when, the news is all about inflation and grocery prices and people cutting back, travel demand doesn't disappear. And, a lot of people, we see in research that we do all the time at Expedia, a lot of people will skimp on other types of luxuries like stuff and, spending on new electronics or new phones or whatever. They'll skimp on that stuff, but they won't skip a trip. They may change their destination based on affordability and prices. Like you said earlier, they may take a road trip instead of flying somewhere. But travel seems to be a non-negotiable for people. And it is for me and my family as well. And I love that. It speaks to that whole kind of investing in experiences over
Yeah.
things.
hmm
So that is one thing I find really inspiring every year.
Yeah, I think that it's amazing. And I've touched upon this several times in the podcast, and I'll sort of wrap with this idea that, and the reason that you and I do what we do, I've noticed especially in the last 2 decades I've lived in this country, thereabout, that when I first arrived, travel was, people were traveling, but it was not even close to as much as people do now. I had friends that hadn't left their own home state, and now I've got friends who are traveling all over the world that, they just didn't exist previously. And I think what's beautiful is that now travel has made such a mainstream and has been in the media spotlight now, much more so than previous decades. And it's encouraged people to kind of get out of their comfort zone. And it's so great that, isn't it? Because it becomes like a cultural unifier. It's very powerful, that, and to be able to hand that down to our kids. And I think that's another thing. I mean, as a mum yourself, it's opening my daughter's eyes to be able to go, look, there's other things out there, and there's other worlds and cultures and people. And once you kind of give your kids that bug, I think it's a really great growing tool.
Oh my gosh,
Personally.
I completely agree. Travel is like the best way to build your own self-confidence, to have empathy and understanding for people who come from a place that you didn't come from. Yeah. I mean, all my best memories, and I've changed as a person since I've been able to travel. And I agree with you. Travel has changed in the last couple decades, where it is so much more accessible.
Yeah.
We talk about flight prices being expensive. They are, but there's also a huge difference between a basic economy fare and a first class fare. You can get in at the level that you can afford, you know?
Yeah.
And same thing, there are thousands and thousands of hotels. You can find a really great hotel that's a 3-star hotel, that's a 2-star hotel. You don't have to pay 5-star prices if that's not within, your reality. So travel has gotten easier, and there's so many
Yeah.
places to go.
You can be your own personal travel agent now. I think that's the biggest thing. When I was growing up, my parents would hire a travel agent. You don't have to do that anymore. You can be your own travel agent. There's enough tools out there, right? Like hotels.com, like all of these. You can, Expedia, there's resources now and I think it's more now about stressing to be travel savvy and knowing how to use those tools and doing your research around that. And I can't tell you the amount of times that people come up to me and they're like, what do you recommend if, and I point them to the direction of websites, of apps, of tools that they can do, as opposed to me being the travel agent for them and saying, well, this is what I would suggest. Of course, they can make suggestions, but you can advocate for yourself in the travel atmosphere now, right? So I think that's made a big impact and change. And I don't know if that's something you've seen on your end, but for me, I've noticed it's incredibly encouraging to watch people advocate for themselves, and they're proud of themselves when they do. They go, look, I booked this great trip for X amount of money, and I never would have known. And that actually, I don't know, it gives me a sense of fulfillment, just seeing people do that and go, I actually could do that by myself.
I agree. I love talking to people in this who love to travel, whether it's people who work in this industry or just people who talk to me about it because I tell them where I work, and then they want to tell me about the trip that they took. And, 9 times out of 10, it's a great story. Sometimes you get the, oh my gosh, we just had the worst trip, or we made big mistakes. But even then, people usually have a pretty good attitude about it. Sometimes those travel horror stories become like the most memorable ones, the ones you laugh about and think back to a lot. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, Christie, thank you so much for coming on. Please come on again. I'm sure we've got a lot more to talk about. But just to round up, to let everyone know where to look for full travel deals and anything else you might want to add.
Yeah. Use your apps, guys. Like, hotels.com, Expedia, the airlines, like, they want you to use the apps. And sometimes you can find better prices when you use the apps instead of the website. I have funny conversations with my millennial friends all the time about how they have to make their big purchases on their desktop, like on their laptop, and have their use the apps. You'll find some good deals that way. So use your apps to find the deals, book early, like you said, or at least start saving those hotels, book something with free cancellation so you get something locked in but can cancel it later. And then, yeah, I'd love to come back. We have in October, we come out with all of the trends we've forecasted for the coming year. So hopefully I can come back and share some of those insights.
Yeah. Christie, thank you so much for joining me and for helping us make sense of where travel is headed this fall. I love that behind all the data and trends, travel is ultimately about something much more personal, where we go, what we experience, and sometimes what we discover about ourselves along the way. Thank you, as always, for listening to Beyond the Map. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, follow, and share it with someone who's planning their next adventure. Until next time, keep living and exploring beyond the map. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Map. And if today's episode brought a little inspiration to your travels or just reminded you to slow down and savor the small things, I'd love for you to follow the show and leave a quick review. Until then, keep packing light, living deeply, and discovering the beauty that exists beyond the map.